Making a movie is never easy. Sometimes delays and development hell can sink a project. Sometimes it finally comes out, but it's a bad movie. But every once in a while, everything bad happens repeatedly for 20 years until somehow a diamond pops out on the other side. Mad Max Fury Road is an incredible ride. From start to finish, it's unrelenting and the visuals are stunning. But the long and winding road to the big screen was fraught with peril. After a few years of playing around with different ideas for a new Mad Max, George Miller really got started working on the story in 1999. Now, usually when you're writing a story for a film, you'd, do some writing. George Miller took a bit of a different approach. He chose to hire some artists instead, and the three of them holed up in an office for months working on an extended storyboard for the movie. They called it a series of experiments to get the best story that they could tell visually. They hung the panels on the wall, and you could work your way through the whole movie just by going around the room. At the end of the day, there were a staggering 3,500 storyboard panels taking over the office. In the following years, production continued under 20th Century Fox. A location search went on, and eventually they settled on shooting in Namibia. The look of the desert was perfect for Mad Max. There was nothing but wide open spaces for miles around. With the location sorted out, the next step was the cars. Production designer Colin Gibson set up a mechanic shop in Namibia and went to work customizing and building the many bizarre vehicles that were needed for the movie. Every vehicle was real, and it worked. If you saw a V12 engine sticking out of the hood of a car, that V12 engine worked for real. Doof Warrior's guitar worked for real. Even some of the flamethrowers worked for real. Everything seemed like it was going great. And then 9/11 happened. The US dollar sunk against the Australian dollar and the film's budget was devastated. Production in Namibia halted. Everything that had been built had to be destroyed before they left. In the next few years, George Miller moved on to Happy Feet, but the Fury Road storyboards never left his wall. During this time, Mel Gibson was getting older, and his troubled personal life was becoming more public. The good news was that Miller had already been considering a young actor for Max for a while now, and he had just the young Aussie actor in mind. The bad news was that actor was Heath Ledger, and in 2008 he died and the movie was starless again. In 2009, production had moved to WB and they gave the green light to start back up. This time they were looking at shooting in Broken Hill, Australia. A workshop was opened up, again, and all of the cars were rebuilt from scratch, again. A dirt test strip was built nearby where they tested all of the vehicles and designed all the stunts and gags. Once again, the production had some real momentum and it looked like things were going to happen. In 2010, everything was ready to shoot. All of the cars were done. Costumes and props ready. All of the stunts were planned. The script was done. The shots had been planned for 10 years. Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron had been cast and were ready to go. But then the bad luck came back and the location that was supposed to be a desert flooded. Not only that, but when the water receded, what had once been dry and arid had started to bloom with green. In 2011, the production moved back to Namibia. Unfortunately, Namibia had a few costly surprises in store for WB. Now they had to pay to bring all 150 custom cars over on a boat from Australia. Not only that, but they had to ship in pretty much everything else too. In Australia, they had access to things like equipment houses, local talent, hospitals. There was nothing like that in Namibia, especially not in the middle of the desert. To compensate for this, WB shortened the shooting schedule from 140 days down all the way to only 100. Shooting started in June 2012 and was a time of constant anxiety for Miller. Almost every day was a big stunt shoot. Every vehicle had different safe places that the actor could stand, different places to set up the safety rigging. Every day, the set was traveling at 60 kilometers an hour through the desert with people jumping on and off of it miles and miles from the nearest thing resembling a hospital. But the result is undeniable. It looks real because all the important bits are. People really are walking along the back of a truck that was barreling through the open desert, and the cameras also had to be going at the same speed. They used special radio-controlled jib rigs on top of modified pickup trucks and dune buggies. All of the crashes were stunt crashes, sure, but even with the incredible work that the stunt team did to make it all as safe as possible, they were still real-deal wrecks where danger was a factor. The motocross guys were played by real motocross guys who collaborated with the production team to figure out what stunts they were comfortable doing around a moving truck, but it was still pretty dangerous.
it was another one of those moments of like, oh, I've got to carry on acting in the scene, damn, but I kind of just want to be watching that. That's awesome.
In the very first scene, Max is running away from a band of war boys and he flips his car. That's a real car flipping with a real dude inside. In fact, it was driven by the same guy that did the bike flip stunt in The Road Warrior. Apparently he was going for a world record on that stunt, but he messed it up and bashed his leg on the car. To make up for that, this time he wanted to set the world record for flipping a car in sand. This was achieved by putting the car into a slide and then activating a flipper arm on the bottom that knocked it up onto its side. The flipper was then painted out in post-production. And that's mostly what they're using CG for in this movie. Backgrounds, adding objects, and removing things that make the stunts work. Even in the shots with a heavy amount of CG, like in the fire tornado scene, there was a heavy practical base to build from. Like in this scene where the war boy jumps off the truck with his spears. I feel the need to stress that he was actually jumping off of a moving truck. That's why it looks so good. The trick is that he was actually on a harness hooked up to a whole rigging system that was riding on top of the truck. After he jumped, a decelerator was activated to slow him down before he went under the tires. It took 5 people to operate this massive system. As an added bonus, they were also able to hang camera guys off the side. Originally, the pole boys were supposed to be done digitally. The plan was to record them in front of a green screen and then comp it into the scene in post. Because obviously, you can't have real guys swinging back and forth on giant poles on the backs of cars traveling at 60 kilometers an hour. That would be ridiculous. But the early tests for this effect didn't look right. They looked fake. What ended up looking real was hiring some Cirque du Soleil acrobats and sticking them up on poles and driving them through the desert for real. Imagine that. You can still see their carabiners and everything, but that doesn't begin to take away from the sense of danger that you feel flinging back and forth with them.
It was one of those things that from the beginning of the shoot was, not something I was excited about. And he strapped me on it anyway, and that was that. And it was scary.
The fuel truck explosion is one of the best looking explosions that I can think of in a movie. And that was actually done digitally for safety reasons. By which I mean they took the truck and blew it up for real while it was rocketing across the desert for real, and then comped it into the scene with the rest of the cars. A special remote control unit was fitted to the truck so nobody actually had to drive it, and the same was done for a handful of camera trucks. The back of the truck was filled with det cord and over 1,000 liters of gasoline. The explosion was then triggered sequentially down the length of the truck, and it just looks so cool. Then there's the finale crash. We're taking a big old truck and flipping it, then taking another big truck and smashing into that wreckage. It's pretty neat. The first truck flip was done in a pretty similar way to flipping Max's car, except instead of an arm mechanism, we need something with a little more force for the truck. The underside was fitted with a device filled with compressed gas. When triggered, the gas forces a chunk of metal straight down into the ground. The ground can't go down, so the truck goes up, and over, and it crashes. Then we gotta crash into it with everybody's favorite doof wagon. Now, because of the way the cab on that truck is designed, that's actually a really dangerous proposition, even as far as car crashes go. The stunt driver had to actually ride in a special pod on the side of the truck to make it safer. When the truck impacted, the pod decelerated on a special track to lessen the blow. To make the crash look extra awesome, all of the speakers had been mounted with tiny explosives so they would all fly off at the camera. And then came the grueling editing phase. Remember the 3,500 storyboards from pre-production? Now there were at least as many shots that had to get assembled into a movie. The coverage was complete, but the shots were all over the place. Assembling them into a coherent picture was going to take a lot of work and patience. Not even Tom Hardy understood how the movie was going to come together while they were making it, and that caused a bit of drama on the set.
I just really wanted to understand what he wanted, and I just completely failed.
George Miller and editor Margaret Sixel had to just keep cracking away at it and reiterating until they found something they were happy with. Unfortunately, Warner Brothers wanted to run a test screening before they'd finished a full assembly, and audiences hated it. They said it was too much cars, too much action, not enough downtime, Max doesn't talk enough. It looked like it was going to be a 20-year disaster for Miller. Now, if you're thinking that the movie as we got it is unrelenting car chases and action, and Max only has like 8 lines, that's because despite the awful test screenings, George Miller stuck to his guns. He was convinced that it didn't work at the screening because it wasn't done yet, and that was also why Tom Hardy was having such a hard time with it in the desert. After doing some more reshoots and pickup in the desert, shooting finally finished in December 2013. And the rest is history. The movie was completed and the first trailer got shown at Comic-Con to huge applause. They showed the film at Cannes and it was a big hit. When he saw it on screen there for the first time, Tom Hardy finally understood what had been going on in Miller's brain, and he publicly apologized for being difficult on set.
But I didn't quite know how brilliant until I saw that. That's my first reaction was, oh my God, I owe George an apology for being so myopic.
When it hit wide release, audiences loved it. It was such an incredible, pulse-pounding theater experience. Fury Road ended up getting nominated for 10 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, and it went home with 6, including Best Editing. All because George Miller refused to compromise on his vision. Bringing a franchise back to life after 30 years is a tricky thing. And in this particular case, almost everything went wrong along the way. It's easy to say it was good because they did everything for real, but that ignores just how difficult this movie was to put together. From the conception phase of a million storyboards, to the constant difficulties during pre-production, to the dangerous shoot on the dusty plains of Africa, to the mountain of coverage in the edit suite. This movie was a nightmare to put together from start to finish, but somehow, it all came together into something unforgettable. That's all I got for now. Come back on Saturday for something about Silence of the Lambs.